to turn up. I've been told she'll be here within the next 2 minutes, so apologies for the delay. Right, without further ado, we shall get things underway. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Bath and North East Somerset Planning Committee on Wednesday, the 15th of January 2025. Happy New Year to everybody. My name's Councillor Ian Halsall. I am the chair of the committee, and I'll introduce my colleagues here on the top table, starting on my far right.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Truman, Senior Lawyer for Baines.
My name is Christopher Griggs-Trevarvan. I'm a team manager of one of the development management teams.
Karina Haskins from Democratic Services.
Thank you. Could I remind everybody to please switch off their phones and electronic devices so we don't get any interruptions. I'll just also advise, as people are aware, that the meeting is being filmed and is being broadcast live on our website. It will be available on YouTube as well. We've got two speakers here. If you don't want to be seen on camera, just let the operatives in the corner know, and we'll just have your voices recorded with the video cameras. So, without further ado, can I ask Karina to read out the emergency evacuation procedure from the council chamber here at the Guildhall?
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the illuminated green signs to the exit using either the marble staircase at the end of the building nearest to Bath Abbey or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. Thank you.
Thank you. It might be worth us all turning left and using the marble staircase because we have graduations going on, so the building is quite busy at the moment. Could I ask Karina if there's any apologies and any substitutions, please?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Paul Crossley and Councillor Ruth Malloy as substituting.
Thank you. Could I ask members if they've got any declarations of interest on the agenda? There's no hands going up, so I assume that is not the case. Just on item 4, urgent business, I think this is the best point to raise this matter. I wish to apologise to anybody watching who were watching the committee last month. It was quite a long 6-hour session, but we did have some significant audio problems, and I know a number of councillors weren't audible. So hopefully we'll be forgiven for that. And we've also had a problem with the hearing loop here in the chamber, but I am assured that's now being rectified as well. Okay, Karina, could I ask you to inform the public about the speaking procedure?
Thank you, Chair. Speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as follows. Parish town councils will be first, but we don't have any today. Objectors to an application will be next and allowed 3 minutes in total. Supporters of an application will follow and be allowed 3 minutes in total. We don't have any ward councillors speaking today either. I'm going to time the speeches next to me, and the chair will advise when there's 30 seconds to go. Thank you.
Yeah, we seem to have mislaid the traffic lights that we normally use. I also should incidentally say welcome to our two officers in the corner here. We've got Daniel, our highway officer, and Izzy, who's a planning case officer. Okay, we shall move on to item 6, which is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 18th of December. Now, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very happy to propose the minutes are correct, except in respect of a few small points which I would like to introduce as amendments to the minutes. But, you know, the way minutes are produced is admirable always, but sometimes things happen that make the minutes not quite clear to an ordinary person outside reading them. And if we go to page 7 and point 7, it says, the applicant did advertise stag hen parties on promotional matters. There was a limit of 16 people in any one session, which would restrict the number of people using the facility. I don't think that's what the applicant said. They said there were 16 go-karts, or we could insert the word just 16 riders instead of 16 people, and then that would make it clear that there was a limit to the number of people in the facility. But of course we know the friends, family, the bridegroom, the rest of them might be there having a drink or whatever. That's a matter for licensing, of course, the total number on the building. So if we could just change the word 16 people to 16 go-karters or 16 riders, that would be, I think, make that point clear. And then if we carry on down to point 11, there's a healthy supply of industrial units in Keynsham. I'm sure it relates to the viability study that the applicant submitted. It was Keynsham and the Soma Valley. And should they go to appeal, they might want to reference that. So I think it would be appropriate to insert industrial, this is under point 11 on page 7, industrial units in Keynsham and the Soma Valley. And then, are you up with me?
Yeah, shall we get a seconder on that particular item?
Well, there's one more on page 10. There's a reference to the application would improve the site and would include screening to protect the Grade 2 listed building. Can we just add the word opposite? Because the red post inn is opposite the site, not. There could be confusion with the old bakery, which is alongside the site. So we just put the word opposite on page 10.
That's in the context
the
of
Grade 2 listed building.
That's in the context of the old quarry. We've got Fairy Hill Compton Dando for the solar farm. Was there an amendment you wanted to recommend for that as well? I've got here page 8.7, delete additional housing, replace with sites for housing to meet government requirements. That's, yes, number 2. Okay, thank you for putting forward that motion and to recommend those changes. I've already seen a hand from Councillor Warren to accept those changes. And are we all generally happy with those amendments to the minutes? Yeah, okay, thank you very much. So, item 7, site visits. We didn't have any site visits for this committee, so we'll now move on to the main plans. For the purposes of people watching online, I'll just advise that item 2 has been withdrawn. This is Woodlands in Staunton Lane, Whitchurch. Unfortunately, the application has been invalidated because it was registered incorrectly. Is that right? So we need to re-advertise that application, assuming we've got the consent from the applicants to do so, and that will return to the February committee. So we've only got one item to discuss, which is for Whitecross House in East Harptree. And I'll hand over to Izzy to give her presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this is the full application at Whitecross House in East Harptree for the provision of 4 dwellings by the subdivision of the main house, the conversion of the ancillary stables, former workshop, and erection of 1 new dwelling. I do have a verbal update for the committee. An additional comment was sent directly to the chair of the planning committee from a third party on the 31st of December. This was after the publishing of the committee report. The planning officer has reviewed the objection comment received, and it's not considered that the comment raises new issues which have not been addressed in the committee report, and therefore there's no further commentary from officers in relation to this matter. This comment is on the public file, and planning committee are asked to have regard to this. There's also a correction to the officer report. On page 33 of the public reports pack, there's an incorrect reference to the council's duty under section 85 of the Countryside and Right of Way Act. This should be section 86. Officers would also like to add to the assessment set out in this part of the report in confirming that they have had regard to the special qualities of the Mendip National Landscape. There are 15 special qualities, and 2 of these are of particular relevance to this application: views into the national landscape and views out. The scheme is not considered to impact upon these special qualities nor any of the other special qualities of the national landscape. So the site is shown in red on the location plan on the screen. This is Whitecross House just here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. These are the outbuildings which are referenced as the former stables and workshop in the report. Court Cottage down here is owned by the applicant, but no changes to this building are proposed as part of the scheme. The garden area here does form part of the scheme, and this is where the new dwelling is proposed, and I'll show you the site plan in a minute. So an aerial image, just to give some context. I've showed the list of buildings which are referenced in the report with the orange and red stars on the screen. So this is the Grade 2 listed clock tower, Harptree Court, and then the Harptree Court gate piers are just here. This obviously is Whitecross House, the former stables just here. So I'll start with some site photographs of Whitecross House. So it's just here on the corner of High Street and Whitecross Road. This is the Grade 2 listed clock tower referred to in the previous slide. As you can see, the building is in quite a prominent location on the corner of this junction. So moving along Whitecross Road within the village hall is behind me in this image. So this is the main house just here. You can actually see the single-storey side extension, which is proposed to be demolished in lieu of the 2-storey extension, which I'll show you on the plans in a minute. There's an existing access here with the wooden gates. These gates will be removed as part of the proposal, and this will form the only vehicular access into the site. You can just see the edge of Corner Cottage here and here on the images. Moving around the corner of Whitecross House, stood on the High Street, this is the existing access from the High Street into the site. This is actually proposed to be bricked up as part of the scheme with a pedestrian access gate into the site. And then moving into the site, so these are the former stables and workshop, which are proposed to be converted into a dwelling. And then some further images of the former stables to be converted, so these just here, and this is the rear of the dwelling known as Pump Cottage. And this just here, the scaffolding, and here are the rear of Whitecross House. And then some photos of the side extension to be demolished, so it's this little single-storey element here. That's going to be replaced with a 2-storey side extension. I'm stood with this image with the wooden gate behind me facing into the site. And then this wall, which goes across the site, is referenced in the report, particularly in the heritage assessment. So I wanted just to show it on the images. And then for this photo here, I've walked through the little access through this wall. So this is the garden area where the new dwelling is proposed. Again, some further images of the garden area. So this is facing towards the former stables building, which you can just see over the wall here. And then this is the rear of Whitecross House and Court Cottage just here. And then I've taken some dwellings sort of broadly from where the new dwelling is proposed, facing towards Whitecross House and the former stables and number 1 High Street. You can see in these images that there is a level change between the site and the site next door, so you can just kind of see down here that this is at quite a significantly lower level. And then I've got some photos from the neighbouring property. The neighbour was kind enough to let me visit their property, just to show the relationship between number 1 High Street and the site. So this elevation here is the rear elevation of the former stables and workshop. So this forms the boundary with the neighbour. I'm going to come on in the presentation to talk about the windows, but you can just see them in this image here and then here. This is an image from the neighbouring kitchen window, so you can just see behind this shrub there is a window in the elevation, rear elevation of the former stables. And then this is taken from inside the former stables, facing out. The garden that you can see through the trellis is the neighbouring garden. So just to really show that elevation is the boundary with the neighbour. So moving to the plans, this is the existing site plan. So this is Whitecross House here with its single-storey extension, the workshop, former stables here, and then the garden area, which I showed you earlier, just here. And then we've got Court Cottage and Pump Cottage. Neither of those are proposed to be altered as part of the scheme. And then the proposed site plan, so again, this is Whitecross House. We've got the two-storey side extension now, which has replaced the single-storey extension. The existing stables have been converted to a dwelling. You can see that there's not any change to the overall plan. There's no extension to this building, but there are some roof lights, and I'll come on to the other elevational changes later in the presentation. Then we've got the proposed new dwelling in the corner here, and then hard standing to form kind of the parking area and circulation space to the courtyard. There are also some sort of defensible garden spaces for each property. I'm sort of pointing them out on the screen now, so hopefully you can see that. So we'll start with Whitecross House. These are the existing elevations. So again, you can see the side extension. This is the kind of main front elevation, which fronts onto Whitecross Road, and then moving around to the side, where you've got the side extensions existing. And then we've got the rear elevation, which faces towards the former stables, and the elevation which faces onto High Street. And then the existing floor plans. And then we've got the proposal. So you can see that the single-storey extension has been removed and replaced with this two-storey side extension, which officers consider is subservient to the main house. You can see it's set down from the roof ridge and set back from the front elevation. This will be constructed in materials to match the existing dwelling, and officers have recommended a condition accordingly. This is the rear elevation, so you can see that the subdivision has involved the provision of additional doors at the rear, so for entering and egressing the site. And then here you can see that this access from High Street has been bricked up with a wall and a pedestrian gate. The Highways considered this is a planning benefit of the scheme because the visibility coming in and out of this part of the site is quite poor as existing. And then the proposed floor plan. So the first dwelling is this dwelling here, and then you've got the second dwelling which utilises the two-storey side extension just there. And then you've got bedrooms and a snug and dressing rooms at the first floor. And then, apologies, there are also rooms in the loft space just shown here. There are roof lights proposed as well, which I didn't point out in the elevations, but that facilitates the conversion of the roof space. So moving to the former stables, these are the existing elevations of the former stables. And the floor plans, so the workshop and store is largely contained to the ground floor. There is a small workshop area just here in the roof space. Minimal changes are proposed, mainly to the fenestration to facilitate the conversion. So the scheme is utilising the existing openings, or generally utilising the existing openings, replacing quite a lot of the timber doors with double doors, and then there's a front door just here. And then we've got the proposed rear elevation. So this is largely remaining the same as existing. However, the two windows here and here are proposed to be obscurely glazed, which is secured by condition. And then this window here, which is the window which is closest to the neighbour's patio door, the one in the images with the shrub in front of it, is proposed to be bricked up. Officers considered that that's sufficient to mitigate the potential loss of privacy, but that's for the committee to discuss and decide. You will have seen in the previous elevation drawings and on the images that there are trellises placed over these windows. These are shown as removed in this plan. The Planning Commission wouldn't be required to remove these trellises, and I think it's important to assess the scheme as if they're not there and the impacts of not having them there to provide additional screening. It would be a civil matter for the applicant and the neighbour to decide and come to an agreement on them being removed. So the proposed floor plans show that the primary most of the living accommodation is at the ground floor level. So you've got the kitchen and dining living, one small bedroom, and then the master bedroom is on the small area on the second floor where there's a workshop as existing. And then moving to the new dwelling, so I'm just going to show you the existing site plan again. So we've got the existing garden, which I showed you the photographs of just here. And that's where the new dwelling is proposed. So these are the elevations. You'll see from the floor plans in a moment that it's kind of an L-shaped dwelling, but it's built in a character which officers consider match the character of the dwellings in the locality. Traditional stone is proposed as well as roof tiles, and again, we've recommended a condition for material samples. And these are the side elevations. So this is the elevation which faces towards Court Cottage just here. And then the floor plan, so you can see that it's got an L-shaped form, and there is parking to the side. There's a small garden to the front of the site. Again, most of the living accommodation, the communal living accommodation is downstairs, and then you've got the bedrooms on the upper floor. So I'm going to move to some street scenes because I just think they're quite useful in showing the site in context. So you can see the extension to Whitecross House, the converted stables to the rear, and then you can just see the proposed new dwelling, excuse me, which sits slightly above Court Cottage, but again has that traditional form that the buildings in this part of the village have. And then there's a couple of CGIs which I think are really useful. So this is one of the proposed dwelling. And again, this is a wider view. You can see the proposed dwelling here, the courtyard area with the tree in the middle, and then the converted stables, the edge of the converted stables just here. So just a brief application summary before I come to my recommendations. So officers have, as set out in the report, identified that the scheme would result in less than substantial harm to the conservation area, largely due to the additional hard standing, the proposed removal of the wall across the site, and the erection of the new dwelling. The NPPF sets out that where less than substantial harm is to a heritage asset is identified, decision makers must consider whether there are public benefits of the scheme which outweigh that harm caused, giving great weight to the heritage assets as a starting point. The planning balance section of the officer report sets out the officer assessment in regard to this matter and does conclude that the scheme will make use of a sustainable site within an existing settlement and represents an effective use of land. There will be some job creation as a result of the development through construction, albeit temporary, and as such, officers have weighed that there are sufficient public benefits to outweigh the less than substantial harm identified, and this is a judgment that the committee will have to come to. The scheme will also deliver BNG in accordance with policy NE3A. It's not required to be mandatory biodiversity net gain because this scheme was submitted prior to the mandatory biodiversity net gain date coming in. There's no highway authority objection, and the revised plans proposing obscure glazing and the bricking up of the window of the formal stable have addressed officer concern with regard to residential amenity. The comments from consultees and third parties have been really carefully considered, and in the view of officers, the scheme is policy compliant, and therefore officers recommend it for permission in accordance with the conditions set out in the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Izzy. So we'll move on to public speakers. We have two speakers on this application, one objecting and one in support. We normally take the objector first. So we've got Mark Jerzak in the building. Hello there. If you want to go to the middle tables, or can he, yeah, is it the middle table? Yeah, if you go to the middle tables, and as Karina said, you've got, obviously we've had representations from you which have been circulated and are publicly available on the website, but you've got 3 minutes, and I'll give you a quick interruption at 2.5 before you sum up. Another little blip. We'll forgive you for that. Right, you should be ready.
Okay. All right, thank you. I live at 1 High Street, adjoining the proposed development. I'm objecting today both as a directly affected neighbour and as a trustee of East Hartpury Village Hall, where our community shop, hairdressers and nursery all operate. Like all neighbouring properties and businesses, we have serious objections to this development. After 10 months of objections, the applicant finally acknowledged one of the many privacy issues and proposed blocking up their closest window to our home. However, 2 more windows would still look straight into our bedrooms from just 5 and 8 metres away, measurements that they have not shown on their drawings. Currently, these garage windows are completely blocked for privacy. Panels and plywood on their side, as you saw from a couple of the images, and mature planted trellises on our side. Arrangements that have existed for at least 12 years during our time living there. The applicant has quietly removed our privacy measures from their drawings without even speaking to us. Then there's the proposed two-storey building that would tower over our garden from elevated land. The applicant hasn't even measured or shown these level differences in their application. Why not? Because proper measurements would reveal the true impact. Planning standards require 21 metre separation plus additional distance for level changes. The land is between 1 to 2 metres higher, but without proper survey and sections, how can this committee assess the real impact? Despite its sensitive conservation area location, this scheme tries to squeeze 4 new dwellings into this constrained site on top of the existing 2 that they also own, with just 9 parking spaces between them. Every neighbouring property has objected due to the privacy violations, overcrowding, safety issues and the impact on the conservation area. The lack of parking would severely affect our community businesses, elderly customers accessing the shop and the hairdressers, parents dropping children at nursery and primary school. This isn't about opposing development, it's about protecting both residential amenity and our village character. The applicant has had 10 months to properly assess these impacts, but has chosen not to do so. The application still lacks the most basic information about level differences and separation distances. I would welcome a site visit so that you can all see these impacts for yourself. Despite multiple invitations over the past year, neither the applicant nor their design team have spoken to us or visited us to view these impacts from our property. In my opinion, in my opinion, either they're unaware or they don't care about the impact. In my view, neither of those is acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your statement there. The next speaker is Sasha Berezina, and you're going to be speaking in support of the application. Again, I'll just give you a quick gentle prod at 30 seconds so you can start summing up after your 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Councillors. My name is Sasha Berezina. I'm an agent for the applicant, Mr. Branch, who spent all his life in this village, and his family was running the village shop for many years before it got closed in the early 2000s. The village shop was run from White Cross House, and after the shop closed, it remained their home, but with over 400 square meters of accommodation and children growing up, etc., it's now not needed, and the site can provide much greater level of accommodation than it does now, which is a single oversized dwelling. I personally think this is a very successful scheme. We've been working on it for many years, and I'm proud to present it to you. This is a development on a brownfield site, reusing a historic building in a sustainable manner, and exactly the type of development that is supported by local plan and national policies. As you will be aware, the recently rewarded and updated NPPF places even greater emphasis on reuse of brownfield sites such as this. It states that such development proposals should be regarded as acceptable in principle and should not be refused unless substantial harm is caused. The proposal does not cause substantial harm. On the contrary, it delivers a number of benefits and secures a sustainable future for one of the most distinctive building groups in the village. The main building, apart from a sympathetic replacement extension and some roof lights, will not be changed. The historic stables will be repaired, brought back to use and retained as they stand. All the main alterations will be internal. The new house will be glimpsed from the street as part of an attractive internal courtyard with a central tree, low boundary walls framing small front gardens. This is perfectly in character with the conservation area and is an improvement on existing close-boarded fence and parking space in front of it. In terms of residential amenity, neighbours would retain acceptable living conditions, and there is no significant change to the existing relationship between the properties. The new building is purposely designed to avoid any overlooking or overbearing issues. Mr. Branch is happy to make alterations to the existing building, to the windows at the back of the stables. He has accepted the condition to keep them obscurely glazed. We are proposing to block up one of the windows, and the neighbour will still has his right to do whatever he wants on his land. If he wants to put a trellis or put some climbers on it, that's perfectly possible. The stables do not rely on these windows for any outlet.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Highway safety would not be prejudiced because the existing narrow access will be pedestrianised. The access to Whitecross roads will have better visibility, and highways are supporting this. There are no technical consultees objections, and the planning office is obviously supporting it, so I'm hoping you would reach the same conclusion. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your statements. We'll move on to questions of the officers. I've got a question. Have we got a copy of the site allocation plan with showing the red line boundary on the, first of all? I just want to be clear as to how many dwellings we have on the site at the moment and how many we will have as a consequence of giving this permission. Is it there? Yeah, there we go. You just had it. So I can see we've got Pump Cottage and Court Cottage. We've also got numbers 1 and 2 on the side. So that's 4 net at the moment.
One and 2 is Pump Cottage, is my understanding.
It's actually Pump Cottage. So that's what's an ancillary part of the main house then in that case.
So you have Whitecross House, which is the main...
The Whitecross House.
Yeah, Whitecross
Apologies.
House is the main dwelling. So that at the moment is one dwelling.
Yeah.
Then these buildings here at the back are the ancillary outbuildings.
Yeah.
Then you've got Court Cottage, which is a separate dwelling, but in the same ownership, not affected by the proposals. And then Pump Cottage is labelled here as 1 and 2, but that, my understanding is that is one dwelling, again, not affected by...
So at the moment we have 3 dwellings on the site. So as a consequence of granting permission, we will end up with the subdivision of Whitecross House and the new dwelling as well. So we'll have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties within the red line boundary.
I think it would be 6, Chair, because you've got 2 in Whitecross House and then you've got the
And the
state
conversion, yes, of course we have, yeah. So that'd be yeah, so it's a net increase of 3 dwellings on the site. Okay, it's just, I saw the image of the wheelie bins, because we've already got the 4 wheelie bins outside the back of Whitecross House. Presumably with the additional dwellings, there is going to be a condition that controls where all the refuse and recycling will go.
There's not a condition, Chair, but there bin store, is shown on the proposed site plan, which I'll try and get through to. Sorry, there's a lot of slides. Yeah, so this here is a bin and bike store. I believe it's shown on the floor plans as well, and I think over here is a bin and bike store as well.
Okay, thank you. Has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask? Councillor Jackson.
Oh, yes, you can hear me, yes? Yeah, thank you for bringing this one up. I've got 3 issues, actually, I'd like some clarification about. Firstly, looking at that layout there, and if I remember rightly, the allocation of parking spaces per dwelling is 2 vehicles. It's not more in a rural area, is it? But there doesn't seem to be a visitor's space, or is there? Secondly, we are being urged to move over to electric vehicles, and I would expect the people who would live here would be the kind of people to get themselves an electric vehicle, but I can't work out where the charging points are for a resident who has an electric vehicle. And I don't know if there are any public charging points in the village, but probably there aren't. So this is quite an important point. Thirdly, I'm a bit puzzled by the Conservation Officer's statement that aluminium window, the whole appearance and look of this close strikes me as key to the issue, whether it's an enhancement of the conservation area or not, and whether it's going to adversely affect have an adverse impact on the listed buildings or not. These I think, are the key questions. So I'm a bit puzzled about the statement that aluminium window frames are acceptable. both from the point of view of appearance and functionality. I've got both on my ancient cottage, and the timber windows work much better and look much better than the aluminium ones. So I wondered if we could have some clarification on that point. And finally, there's an argument that this is overdevelopment of the site, and I wondered what the officer's response is to that.
Thank you. Shall we deal with the parking and electric vehicles first and then move on to Izzy?
Yep, in terms of parking, I can answer that one. You're right. There, in terms of this type of location in the countryside, the parking standards for 2- and 3-bedroom houses would be 2 spaces per dwelling. And given the scale of the development, there wouldn't necessarily be a requirement for visitor parking. If it was a larger scheme, then yes, you'd expect that. But for this scale, then we wouldn't necessarily require that. Electric charging provision, that would be secured for any new property underneath the building regulations requirements. So whilst it's not shown on this plan, building regulations would secure electric vehicle charging points for any new development.
I'll come back on your question about the windows. So the proposed windows in Whitecross House and the new dwelling will be painted timber. The aluminium windows are proposed on the former stables, the converted dwelling at the rear of the site. I, as an officer, have made a judgment that this is acceptable given the backland location, the fact that there are quite limited views of this building from the public realm, and therefore think that aluminium is an acceptable material in this case. That, again, is obviously a judgment for the committee to come to. In terms of overdevelopment of the site, my view is clearly that it isn't an overdevelopment of the site. There's sufficient circulation space for vehicles. Each property has kind of a small garden area, and to my mind, the site plan and the layout doesn't look particularly crowded. And actually, the design of the new dwelling does reflect the local character. There's quite a mix of sort of pattern and grain in this area, with some sort of denser form of housing. A little bit higgledy-piggledy, to use the technical term, in terms of it being a village. So I think the layout works well. So from an officer perspective, we're content that it doesn't represent overdevelopment.
Thank you. Councillor Gawley, did I see your hand up?
I think to take Councillor Halson's question further, how many bedrooms are there now in that site, and how many more bedrooms will there be? I think this is going, obviously speaking to the overdevelopment. I've also got a question about the amount of garden space that there is for what look like substantial 3- to 4-bedroomed houses, and the question whether, knowing that when you put up a large estate you have to have allotments, is there sufficient outdoor space that's garden as opposed to hard standing and parking? So that's a question I had. Yeah. I think there's a question of the affordability of any of the properties. Are any of these aimed at being affordable? Because we are obviously looking for more affordable cottages in villages. So I guess that's a question as well.
Thank you. So in terms of bedroom numbers, I'm trying to do a quick count and from memory, but I believe both of the dwellings proposed in Whitecross House are 3 bedrooms. The converted stable building is 2 bedrooms, and the new dwelling, I think, is also 3 bedrooms. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the existing number of bedrooms is on the site. In terms of garden space, we don't have a policy for the amount of garden space that should be provided per dwelling. Officers consider that there is sufficient space, so whiz back to the site plan. There is sufficient space for some local food growing and, proportionate to the scale of a single dwelling within the spaces provided. But I don't think that the fact that they haven't got very, very large gardens would be a sufficient reason to reject the scheme, because there isn't really a planning policy that we have in our development plan which relates to sort of sizes of gardens depending on sizes of dwellings. In terms of affordable housing, this is only a scheme for 4 dwellings. It doesn't trigger the need for affordable housing in this location. It's not a large enough scheme. Therefore, we haven't sought it. It wouldn't be reasonable to do so, and no affordable housing is proposed.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge and then Councillor Collins.
Yes.
Is it green? Can you hear me? It's not saying.
Can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got a few questions, some small ones and then some more substantial ones. So I just want to check the loss of the historic wall. Where was that location of the loss of the wall? The roof lights, they do look like they're conservation lights now. Just wanted to confirm that in the roof. And the loss of 3 parking spaces in the village that was referred to in some of the correspondence. So deal with those questions first, and then I had 2 further questions. One was about the levels of the new cottage and the biodiversity net gain question. Shall I go on to those in full? So,
The first ones, if that's
Yeah.
helpful, and then do
Yeah.
those. So the historic wall is shown on this site plan. That is along this line where my cursor is. I did have a photo of it as well. Let me just goes back to that. Yeah, so it's here across the site. So that's the wall that's referred to in the report. The roof lights, yes, they are proposed now to be conservation style, and there is a condition securing those. In terms of the loss of parking that's referred to in third-party comments, I think that relates to the informal parking that's on the street opposite the access to the site. I think there's been concern raised, obviously, to get in and out of the site. People aren't going to be able to park in those spaces. My understanding is that they're not designated on-street spaces. I don't know, Dan, if you have further commentary on that.
Yeah, just in terms of the site access, and useful to clarify that they're going to use an existing site access for the development. So there's no loss of spaces on that side of the road at all. They're going to close one of the access points onto the high street as well, so that will probably create another parking space opportunity on the street. But I don't see any particular issues in terms of the continued use of the existing access. It's there already, and then people could choose to use it if they want to, and they do use it. There's photos of cars parked in it, so I don't think it's a significant change.
Thank you. I'll just elaborate. So, the loss of the wall, there was a question from Conservation about whether it linked into the curtilage of a listed buildings, not close to it, but nearby. Does it or not really?
So the wall that's being lost isn't curtilage listed, but this wall here, which runs along the rear of the proposed dwelling, Conservation do think is a curtilage listed wall associated with the gate piers for Hartree Court. The proposed dwelling won't be attached to this wall, nor will the bin store or cycle store. That's been confirmed, but there is a planning condition to secure a structural survey of this wall, and then a methodology for any underpinning that may be required to ensure that it's protected during construction.
Okay. So 2 more questions about biodiversity net gain. Just could we see again the pictures of the existing and the proposed site? And the plans, because I had a quick look at the biodiversity net gain report, and it's hard to imagine, it suggests 41% gain, and that seems to be based on, it depends how you do your baseline, doesn't it? And the cottage grounds being listed as poor quality, but there does seem to be quite a large green area existing and less of a green area going forward. I just wondered what your view was on that. It's a lot more hard standing, and there's talk of a number of trees, I think, in the at least 6, and I couldn't see at least 6 on the new plan. So that's I read the report that the 10% requirement came in after the initiation of this proposal, but I would have thought it's still a material consideration. And the other issue is the height levels of the new cottage. I saw in one of the elevations it showed that the height of the new cottage would be higher than the one that is in front. So it's quite difficult to gain a sense of that bigger building in the context. If all the other cottages are similar to the ancillary height and the one in front, what is the impact of this slightly bigger new building in that landscape? And I couldn't tell that in the village setting from what was before us. And also in relation to the neighbour's house, that level distance. There's no elevations or lines between the 2 houses to show the difference in levels and the impacts.
Thank you. I'll try and cover everything, but if I miss anything, just let me know. So, yeah, the existing site plan does show kind of more green spaces. It should be noted that this area here, which is shown green, is actually artificial turf, artificial grass. This area here is grassed. I mean, in terms of BNG, just because the area of kind of green space is greater prior to development, that doesn't mean that post-development can't have an enhancement. BNG does focus quite a lot on the quality of habitats. So what is essentially just a grassed garden does score very, very low in a BNG metric because it doesn't really produce much gain for biodiversity, whereas the proposed scheme does show there is a tree here, some here, and dotted around. I don't have a detailed landscaping plan in this presentation, but our ecologist has looked at the BNG and is satisfied with it. But it can be to do with the planting, if there's any hedge planting proposed, etc. And that will all be secured through the BNG condition, which requires pretty significant levels of detail to make sure that we do get that gain. Policy NE3A says that for minor development, we need to make sure there's no net loss in biodiversity, which there wouldn't be for this scheme, and that an appropriate gain is secured. Obviously, that's a judgment for officers to decide the level of gain. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was over the 10% and fairly significant. So it's kind of, even though there is more hard standing, it's all to do with the way the habitat scores and what value that is to biodiversity. So hopefully that helps answer that question. In terms of the height levels, whilst I'm talking, I'll skip through to the street scene elevation. I don't have existing and proposed levels. I haven't asked for them because I don't think they're necessary. Having been to the site, stood on the site, with the levels as existing, I don't think there would be a significant impact to residential amenity. This is the kind of only context street scene elevation that I've got, and yes, you are correct that the proposed dwelling does sit slightly above Court Cottage, which, as you can see, sits below White Cross House, which is a really prominent and quite tall building. This distance measured on this plan and from this perspective is about 0.75 metres. It's less than a metre. Obviously, again, that depends on the perspective that you're looking at this from. So I haven't asked for site levels between the different sites. I personally don't think, and professionally don't think that they're necessary, and that even though this dwelling will sit slightly above Court Cottage, it still responds to the frontage buildings quite well. It's not significantly going to be taller than Court Cottage, and also, as you can see, White Cross House is a really tall and prominent building, and it's very much subservient to that. So officers have come to the conclusion that the levels and the height of the building are acceptable, but again, that's for the committee to come to a view on.
You got a follow-on question? Yep.
One follow-up question. So the new building behind, shown in white, I just wondered how that is in context with the other cottages in the village around, not just the one in front. Say we can only see the one in front. Is the one in front representative of the other buildings around? Does it stand proud of all the other cottages in that location?
It's quite. Sorry, I don't know if that came on then. There's quite a variety of building heights in this location. And again, I'll try and skip back to some of my photos, but behind the site here, you've got sort of some kind of more ancillary buildings to Harptree Court. They're quite low-level buildings. You've obviously got Court Cottage, which is a relatively small cottage. White Cross House is very tall. The dwellings along High Street are 2-storey, sort of a terrace 2-storey building. So there is a real mix of building heights. I don't think that the proposed dwelling would stand particularly proud with those surrounding buildings and would respond to the context. So that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to on that matter.
Okay, thank you. So we've got Councillor Collins and Councillor McPhee just put his hand up as well. So Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions, Izzy. One relatively small one, which I hope you'll be able to deal with quickly, and one slightly bigger one. So starting with the small one, on the amenity policy D6, we have to have adequate storage and functional arrangements for refuse and recycling. I can see from the site plan, which might be helpful actually for my second question as well, that there are bin stores which all look good. Can you just clarify that the access is with the parking still 2 cars wide, because I assume that refuse and recycling vans will not be able to get into the close, and therefore people will need to present their bins on bin day at the access so that the guys can pick it up, and that will still be enough space for cars to go in and out. So if you could clarify that. And the second question relates to policy SCR6 and air source heat pumps. Now, those aren't shown on the drawing. I can't work out, you might have the exact measurements, the distance between Whitecross House and the stables and workshop. But my understanding is that for this to be compliant with SCR6, air source heat pumps have to be put in. All parts of an air source heat pump under national planning guidance must be at least 1 metre from the property boundary. Now, the smallest air source heat pump I can find is 0.5 metres. So that means you've got to have 0.5 metres plus 1 metre for the garden in order to fit the heat pump, plus, and rather unhelpfully, the only guidance I can find around the clearance around the sides of the units is in inches, 24 inches around the sides of the unit, which I think roughly is 2/3 of a metre. That means that in order for the air source heat pumps to be able to fit in, from the pathway to the side of the house on all of those gardens needs to be at least 2 metres and ideally a bit more than that. And I'm not at all clear, actually, from that plan that there is in fact enough space for those air source heat pumps in compliance with national planning policy. So it'd be really helpful if you've got the precise measurements to show that that can work. So those are my 2 questions.
Thank you. So in answer to your first question, yes, there would be sufficient space to put bins out on bin day, and there hasn't been any concern raised with regard to that. In terms of SCR6, I don't have those measurements, unfortunately, but the only building which would actually require the air source heat pump and to comply with SCR6 would be the new dwelling. The standards don't apply to the converted buildings. However, my understanding is that there is a commitment to provide these heat pumps on all the dwellings, and we have asked for a condition to get details of those. Now, the condition specifies that the air source heat pumps would have to comply with MCS standards, which are the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, which is an industry-led scheme to basically give consumer confidence in air source heat pumps and I think wind turbines as well, though that's not relevant to this scheme. So these standards, yes, do include the distances and the noise limits, etc. So it would be for the applicant to demonstrate that they could achieve that within the layout. I don't have any reason to believe that they wouldn't be able to achieve that, which is why we put the condition on, but I don't have those measurements, unfortunately, to hand.
Let's look at Fee first.
I wondered how you would respond to Speaker 1, who thinks that the 2-storey extension is going to seriously overlook other buildings on the High Street. That was my first question.
Thank you. I think there's been concern raised about the 2-storey extension, but also the proposed new dwelling from various third parties. My view on the 2-storey side extension is that it's sufficiently distanced from existing occupiers. There's the existing intervening building, and actually even the relationship between these 2 buildings, yes, they are close, but it's contained within a courtyard arrangement that is quite common that in villages. There is a degree of overlooking already, so the extension I don't have concerns with. In terms of the proposed new dwelling, there is quite a large separation distance. Again, I don't have the measurements to hand between the rear elevations of the 2 properties. There will, and this is acknowledged in the report, I believe, be views into the garden area. But the windows on the upper floor, particularly here, there's a bathroom window from memory here, which is conditioned to be obscurely glazed, and then a bedroom window is set on a slight angle. And there is obviously the intervening building as well. So officers have come to the conclusion that it wouldn't be a significant level of overlooking. There would be some overlooking, but it wouldn't be significant to a point that we think a refusal would be justified. Again, that's for members to come to a view on.
You got a second question?
And the second one is, one of the objectors, I went through them all, maintained that 3 of the houses were actually 4-bedroom because there was a snug in each of them. I'm not quite sure the implications of that, but just wanted your view.
Yes, that is something that did get raised. So the bedroom numbers I gave earlier are on face value on the plans, but there is, I think, a home office in this building, and there are some snugs proposed. I think that largely relates to probably parking and bedroom numbers influencing the parking numbers. Even if they were counted as bedrooms, my view is they wouldn't change the parking standards, which are maximum standards anyway. So that point, I think, has been sufficiently addressed.
Okay, Councillor Gawley and then Councillor Malloy.
I think this follows up the question about the heat pumps. I can see solar panels on the new dwelling, but there are no apparent solar panels on Whitecross House or the stables. Is that correct? And why can there not be, bearing in mind that we're trying to encourage the use of renewable energy?
Yep, you're correct. So the new dwelling does have solar panels, and the existing house and the proposed stables to be converted don't have solar panels. The policy doesn't require them, so we haven't asked them. I actually think on Whitecross House, because of the number of roof lights that are proposed, it would be quite challenging to include solar panels, and we would obviously have to assess the visual impact of that as well in the context of the scheme. It is something I don't think would be reasonable to secure by condition, because it's not necessary to make the scheme acceptable. They're not required to make the scheme policy compliant, so that's why officers haven't pursued that.
So we're still on questions. Councillor Malloy, you want to raise one?
Yeah, thank you. Well, just a couple of more general questions, really. So going back to the question of a snug, what is the definition of a snug? Is it sort of more modern term for what we might have called a small study, or is it more like a box room? Or, yeah, I'm just interested how you define it. And the other thing was, one of the objections I noted was to do with the sewerage system and the concern about, whether it would be able to cope with this extra development. But so my question is more general, really, about, is that more, it's not a concern for us specifically here, is it? It's not a planning matter so much as a building regulations matter. But if you could explain, the process, how that works, because clearly you might have planning permission, but if you don't get approval from the other team, then you're not going to be able to advance with your plans very far. So could you just explain that a bit more as well, please? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So in regard to your first question, the definition of a snug, I don't have the definition of a snug, but generally they're kind of smaller rooms that are used for, I guess, relaxation, maybe a small chair, sofa, reading nook, that kind of thing. I mean, they could feasibly be used as bedrooms. There's nothing from a planning perspective that we could control them in using those rooms in any way, that you would like in a domestic context. In terms of the sewerage and flooding, it is a planning consideration. The Lead Local Flood Authority have been reconsulted several times on this application, and additional drainage information and some infiltration testing has been submitted. And there's an outline design for the management of surface water, which looks at soakaways. However, we think that we need a bit more information about how the water will be positively drained from the site. So if that's going to go into the foul sewer, we need more details that there will be the agreement of the owners of the sewer, which I believe will be Wessex Water in this location, that is possible. That is a pre-commencement condition. So if we get to a point where there isn't the agreement of the sewer company, that's the applicant's risk. The condition is worded so that they can put forward an alternative drainage scheme. So we don't have all the details up front. We are able to secure them by condition, but that, yes, if a suitable method of drainage can't be put forward, then that really is at the risk of the applicant.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite an avid fan of vintage Coronation Street, and I remember the Rovers Return used to have a snug, so that's how I would define it. 3 old ladies drinking milk stout. Councillor Simon.
Just a minor follow-up on that. There's quite a lot of hard standing I assume it would have to be permeable, and I note there's a condition requiring details of the hard surfacing. So I assume that that will be used to make sure that it is permeable.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So we're still on questions. Councillor Hughes?
Thank you. Mine's very simple. Again, it's about the parking. So, first of all, in terms of, I can see there's 8 parking bays there, but there was a number mentioned of 9 parking bays. So can I just confirm there are 8 parking bays on the sides?
Yeah, it's 8, and that's how the Highway Authority have assessed
8, okay. So, am I right in saying the calculation is based on 6 properties? Where we've calculated the number of bays required, it's based on all 6 properties on that site?
No, it's based on the subdivision of Whitecross House, the conversion of the stables and the new dwelling. Pump Cottage and Court Cottage, to my knowledge, don't have parking as existing. They haven't been included in the calculation. There's no change proposed there. There's no change proposed to those dwellings, so they don't need to be absorbed in the scheme.
But they're within the site. The site, as we see it there, has 6 properties on and 8 parking bays. Am I missing something here?
So the red line has been drawn around the whole site. So yes, those cottages are within it because they are within the ownership of the applicant. But at the moment, they don't have any parking spaces. There would be no policy requirement for the planning department to say, you now need to provide parking, because there's no changes proposed to those dwellings. They're not really part of the scheme, even though they kind of are within the red line. So I think we'd really struggle to object to the scheme on that basis, given that that's an existing situation at the moment, and they would not be contributing to any additional residents in the area.
Okay, thank you. And can you confirm the size of those, particularly the 3 to the right? Can you confirm the size of those parking bays, please?
I have got a map that I can measure from, but you have to give me a minute, so
okay.
I can just do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can come back to you on that. Has anybody else got a question? Councillor Jackson.
Well, thank you, Chair. We have a medieval wall, which is a matter of some contention. I am wondering why there is a medieval wall and whether the condition on an archaeological exploration could be a bit more than just a watching brief, because I'm a great fan of Digging for Britain. What happens if they find a small chapel or some kind of medieval building under where that tarmac space is going to be? Could it be conditioned that there should be a proper exploration of a matter like that? Secondly, I thought we had a policy about vegetable growing space, and at the moment, on the current plans, I don't see anywhere where you could grow vegetables. Could I suggest a condition that the residents, should they so wish, could develop one of those green spaces for vegetable growing? We went to look at Moorlands Cooperative Society building on the annual tour, where there was also a problem, a very similar problem for the new flats that are being created in the old cinema. And they got over that by going upwards with a raised bed, and, you know, there are various pyramids and chandeliers and things you can get for vegetable growing. Could we have a condition relating to vegetable growing, perhaps?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. In relation to the archaeology condition, the watching brief would include any recording of any finds, but we could add a further condition that in the event that something substantial was found, there could be a programme for publication if the committee thought it was necessary. In terms of a vegetable growing condition, I don't think this would be necessary. So we've got policy LCR 9, which obviously does look at local food growing, and that essentially seeks that there is opportunity for people, should they wish, to grow vegetables, fruits, whatever, in their gardens. There are garden spaces for each of these dwellings. They could put small vegetable boxes in there if they wanted to. They could kind of re-landscape to be able to do food growing. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. So I don't think a condition would necessarily achieve anything additional than they could already do.
Councillor Jackson?
Sorry, I can't see terribly well. Where exactly are the garden spaces on the new layout, please?
So we've got the space here for the proposed new dwelling, and then the space here for the converted former stables, and then this space here would be for the two dwellings in Whitecross House. Now, there are a number of footpaths, etc., shown on these plans, but in the future, if people wanted to put grass over their footpaths, there'd be nothing in the planning permission, as officers have put it forward, stopping them from re-landscaping and doing that if they wanted to.
Nothing to stop them tarmacking over their garden space and putting another vehicle on it.
No, there wouldn't be anything in the permission stopping that either.
Okay. Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, I've done my best with the plan. I've measured it at approximately 2.5 by 5 metres for each of those spaces.
That's the standard size, isn't it? Are there any more questions before we move on? Okay. Councillor Hodge.
Could I just be clear on that last point? So it's not an enforcement issue if you decide to change the landscaping and not, so that it no longer provides the biodiversity net gain that we've taken reassurance from?
So the biodiversity net gain condition does secure management for 30 years, so you would obviously have to make sure that you weren't breaching that particular condition.
And I noticed that from the report on page 22, it's 41% net gain is being proposed. But so that is a condition that's enforceable for 30 years. So that sort of rules out the removal of hard surfacing. Is there any way we could, if we are mandated to approve this, is there any way we could add in a condition to remove permitted development rights to put hard surfacing in? Any additional hard surfacing, I should say.
You could remove permitted development rights if you thought it passed the 6 tests.
Okay, so that's something to consider. So if we want to move on, I'm not offering direction here, but I just want to sense from the room, is there any appetite to have a site visit, or do we want to carry on and debate and make a decision today? Right, I'm not seeing any expressions of deferring for a site visit. So who wants to start the discussion? The issues that I've been picking out from this are clearly the fact that we are going to see a net increase of 3 dwellings, so a total of 6 on the site. The parking is deemed to be acceptable. We're going to see a net diversity gain. There is an argument about impact on heritage assets, particularly the wall, impact on adjacent listed buildings, the conservation area, and of course, as has been flagged up from the questions and the presentations we had from speakers, amenity. So have we got any issues that we want to discuss on those points or any other points? Right, so Sean, Councillor Hughes' hand up first, then Councillor Jackson's.
Thank you. Well, I mean, there's quite a lot to like about the scheme, but there's also quite a few areas of concern for me. Personally, I think in a conservation area, I think there's insufficient green space shown on the sides. I think it's bordering on overdevelopments. It's a relatively small site, so that concerns me. I think there is a loss of amenity, both in overlooking and building heights to the adjacent properties. And the issue of parking is an interesting one, because whereas I agree that as far as policy is concerned, it's acceptable, common sense would say that, you know, we're talking about an area that has a high level of car dependency. It's not in the centre of Bath. And I think you have to look at all 6 properties and how the area is going to cope with the parking for 6 properties. And I don't think there's sufficient provision there for parking. So on balance, I'm not particularly keen on the current scheme. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson, that's points noted.
Well, I was going to ask if, given the number of reservations we have about this, and as I've explained, I would like to have the archaeology condition strengthened, whether the officer recommendation or what we should be considering would be more appropriate as delegate to permit, so that these difficulties can be overcome. There's also an issue of the bats, which we haven't explored, and it could be that with a bit of strengthening on the ecology concerns about bats, that we could get something acceptable. So I'm just suggesting perhaps delegate to permit might be more appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to say anything? Councillor Gawley and then Councillor Simon.
Yeah, I mean, I think my concern is overdevelopment and what the future of these dwellings are. I mean, you know, with including the Snugs, we could potentially have 4 3-bed houses. As far as I can see, there's nowhere for kids to play out, for vegetables to be grown, even, frankly, washing to be hung out. So I do wonder whether this is actually affordable, not affordable, we know it's not affordable, whether these are family homes or whether there's a possibility this could become more of a holiday let, and that would concern me. And I think that Councillor Hughes is absolutely right, the 2 additional dwellings, I mean, that are part of the site at the moment, who knows, there may be parking there anyway, so you could end up with another couple of cars at least. So I mean, along with the parish council and the ward councils, I think this is overdevelopment of the site, and I would be very concerned about it. Bearing in mind, you know, what we're looking for is for family homes that people can afford in villages, not potential holiday lets.
Can I ask, a holiday let's C3 use, or whether they're a different use class?
Holiday lets are generally considered to be a C3 use, and unless controls are put on to prevent that, then they could be changed. But obviously the application in front of you is for dwellings.
Councillor Simon.
If I take it that Councillor Jackson is moving delegate to permit, I'd be happy to say...
I'm just making a suggestion.
Well, I'd be happy to move it then. I was going to offer to second your proposal. I think a review of the set of conditions in the light of debate, particularly a condition restricting holiday lets, could be helpful. But I think that the overall assessment is well argued. The point I give weight to the points you made, Chair, in summing up the advantages. And so I'm happy with this proposal, provided that the conditions are revisited in the light of our debate.
Okay, thank you. So you would like to move a recommendation to delegate to permit on the basis that we strengthen the ecology condition, the archaeology condition, restrict the use to, well, prevent it from being used as holiday lets, and as I maybe suggested as well, if it doesn't conflict with any other condition, remove the permitted development rights to put down any further hard surfaces to prevent loss of you know, the biodiversity net gain that we are going to see from this. Anybody want to second that motion at the moment, or do you want to carry on the debate? Because obviously we've got a couple of members who are still quite uneasy about the principal development because of, you know, they feel it's overdeveloped, or you're unhappy with the highway arrangements. Have you got anything else to say, anybody? Councillor Collins.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not volunteering to second. I mean, I find this really hard. I give significant weight in thinking about this to the importance of increasing our housing, and in particular providing housing in rural villages. And I can see, you know, how carefully the officers have considered this application, but it does concern me that there is overdevelopment, there is too much crammed onto this site with limited amenity, with impacts of amenity both for the neighbours in relation to the overlooking, but also I question whether what is left, given how close the houses are to each other, are appropriate levels of privacy, outlook and natural light for the new houses and renovated houses in that little group together. I understand what the officer says about this being not common in villages, but this does seem very, very crowded. And given that we don't have the exact measurements, and some of the earlier plans seem to show that there's not a lot more space than 2 vans and a small bit between the 2 houses at that end, it does feel to me as if there's going to be, it just feels as if there's too much housing and not enough space around it. And it's a pity, because if there's a little bit less on the site, it would be an absolutely excellent scheme. So I do find this one hard, but I'm veering towards thinking it's overdevelopment.
Councillor McPhee.
Similar, really. It would seem to me logical in a car-based area that if you were doing developing, you would give some parking space to every house that's there. Whereas it just seems that if you're already there, you're going to be pushed out on the street. And we know from the other people that have spoken, there's a great deal of concern about having enough parking for the shops to do what they want to do. So I was going along quite happily until I kind of Councillor Hughes' point. So I'm veering towards.
Councillor Warren and then Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, it's difficult. Some of this is a bit contradictory. Just listening to the debate, there's a bit crammed in there. Absolutely, there's a bit crammed in there. But on one hand, we're saying it's overcrowded. On the other hand, we're saying we need more affordable housing in the villages. But if you take two houses out of that, they can be a lot more expensive to buy. It does go, actually, it is with policy, otherwise it wouldn't be here making the recommendation to permit. Parking is difficult. For the shop at the other side of the road, there's a car park right there. I don't know if you can show the village hall again, but there's a village hall as the car park, so there actually is quite a bit of car parking there. But it is a difficult one. And my biggest concern, I think, of the whole lot is just the difference in the heights between what's proposed and the neighbours. And yeah, look, that is my biggest concern. But saying that, I think soon up it is within policy. There's a good chance. It's a material consideration, probably not. There's a good chance if it was appealed, it'd go through. So I am tempted. In fact, I will ask second Councillor Simon's motion.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Does anybody else want to say anything before we go to a vote? Yes, Councillor Jackson.
A second, I was wanting a bit of an explanation. I couldn't get on the website last night. It's on page 53. We just have the standard paragraphs about SIL, and there is no section 106, I understand, because this development is too small to require one. So could we have some clarification about what payments the developer would make for the community benefit? We've already talked about this being an unsustainable location without bus service. Would it be appropriate for the SIL money to go to subsidise the community bus service, for example, or to support the community shop so that people wouldn't need to go and shop somewhere else?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. I'll just take that point around payments. Obviously, the scale of development does not justify trigger any contributions against our planning obligations SPD, so there's no requirement for Section 106 planning obligations to be supported by this. However, the scheme would likely be liable for a community infrastructure levy charge, which is, I believe, £100 per square metre, I think, or in that order. So that would go into the council SIL pot, and the funds, how that is spent is a separate council process, but it is used to fund small community projects as well as other larger strategic scale projects around the district. So that could be used for the types of purposes that you're talking about. Just to pick up on some of the debate before you go to the vote as well, and Councillor Collins did acknowledge this, I do accept, but obviously we do have a very pressing need for housing in the district. This is a site in a village, and our current core strategy does allow for sustainable growth within appropriate villages. This is an RA2 village, and as set out in the officer report, the principle of development is acceptable. I've heard the concerns about overdevelopment. I think, obviously, the site is the size it is. We can't make the site any bigger, and I think we've got to look at the context and think about whether, given the site, given the constraints and that pressing need for housing, is this appropriate and acceptable? And I appreciate some views have all been aired on both sides of that. So just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. The fact that it's delivering 3 houses is quite a significant material consideration. Well, it's not a material consideration; it is actually a policy consideration. I think it carries a lot of weight. Does anybody else want to say anything before we take a vote? Councillor Jackson.
I don't quite, is this going to be, say, Whitecross Close with an adopted entrance? And will there be anything to stop somebody collecting little Johnny from school actually parking in there and maybe taking a space that a disabled resident might want, or people just simply live there? Is there anything to stop them getting blocked in by outside drivers?
Yes, Dan will be able to concur that it's private, it'd be private land, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be private land. It would be the same as anyone parking on your driveway space opposite a school, so it would be no different to that. It would not be adopted highway, so it would be a civil matter.
Councillor Hodge.
Yes, just in advance of the vote, could you run through what would be agreed with the delegation, so we're really clear on that before the vote?
So hopefully Chris will take note of this. The motion is to delegate to permit, which has been seconded by Councillor Warren. It is to strengthen the archaeological condition on the basis of not just having a watching brief, but if anything is discovered, having an action plan in place to address anything that may be discovered. It's to strengthen the bats. Maybe Councillor Jackson, you can put some more meat on the bones on this one. It's regarding the bats. What would you like to see in terms of the condition?
To make it simple, that the remediation structures for bats and swifts, we forgot about swifts, should be satisfactory to the officer. It sets out the tests in the officer's report, but we need some assurance that these are going to be sympathetically carried through and approved by Nature England. So if we leave it to the discretion of the officer in a condition, I think that's probably the simplest way forward.
Yes, so what I heard from Councillor Simon's motion was to delegate to permit for the officers to review in light of the debate to heard. So we've taken the point. So we'll review the conditions on those points and decide whether any changes are necessary to pick up those points. We can look at them in detail outside of this meeting. I think there were also a couple of points about us looking at potential removal of condition restricting holiday lets and PD rights, yes. And I just want some clarity. Is that for officers to review and determine whether that is something that's necessary, or if that's something you want to explicitly add to the motion that those two would be added?
Councillor Hodge? Sorry, yeah, we'll go to Councillor Simon in a second, just to clarify your motion.
It's uncertainty if it's to be reviewed. We know what to expect if it's going to be added to the motion.
Mr. Simon, you put forward the motion.
I wasn't trying to draft a set of conditions. What I was suggesting was that the officers would review the debate, and where valid concerns have been raised, they would make sure the conditions address those concerns.
Okay, and Councillor Warren, you're happy with that as well. Shall we have a vote then? So the motion is to delegate to permit, subject to a review of a number of conditions that have been discussed. Seconded by Councillor Warren. All those in favour? That's 6. And those against? Okay, so the motion's been carried. Planning Permission has been granted, subject to delegation. Thank you very much. Move on quickly to the next item before we conclude business, and that is in respect of the appeals report. Has anybody got any comments to make on the appeals that have been lodged and determined? So can we just take note of that, please? Yep. Right. The next meeting, we've got no site visits. The next meeting is going to be Wednesday, the 12th of February. And unless there's anything else, I don't think there is, we will close this committee. So thank you very much for attending and for watching online and taking part.